Okay, so by using this UML, this class model, this diagram, we can now go into the code and create a class called car, and then we can create those 4 fields plus their functions. Of course, this is an incomplete list. You usually have more functions and more data, but this is just an example of what a class would look like. Okay, and the reason why I show you this is because from here on, we'll be talking a lot about objects. Okay, objects are pretty much the core importance of this class. As Java, it's an object-oriented language, so you remember from day one, you actually use objects already, you just don't know it. Okay, so before we get into the classes, let's look at a method. Okay, I'm going to create a new project in here. We'll create a Unit 3 Java project. So in here, usually you will create a package. So I'm going to go create that as well. The package name will be just, I'll just call it, what do we call it? Classes and objects. Okay, classes.objects. And just click finish. Then we'll create our first class. This will be our main program, so I'll just call the same thing, this main program for now. This is where everything starts, as before, with the static main method here checked. And just click finish. So here's our typical class with our main method. So a method, if you remember, from day one, when you first write your first program, you actually are using a method already called main. Okay, we talked about this last time already. And so this is what a method will look like in Java. It has these keywords in there. Well, let's go a little bit further up. So we have the class name. Okay. The class name it starts here, it ends down here, line 10. Okay, your methods are also called functions in other languages, and the word method here is usually applied to the object-oriented world. Okay, so any language that deals with object-oriented, object-based is usually called method. Not sure why they changed it, but it usually is. But it means the same thing, it's just a function. Okay. And the procedural type of language you might have things called subroutine, which is the same thing. If you are a Visual Basic developer, you have 2 different names. One is called a function, the other is a subprocedure. Okay, so a method or a function must be declared inside a class. Okay, like you see here, it must be only inside a class. It cannot be inside another function. Java doesn't allow you to do that. If you are a JavaScript developer, yes, you can have a function within a function. It doesn't matter. But Java does matter. So all your function must be inside a class. It cannot be outside of any class or inside any other functions. So all have the class scope. Okay, so here's the first function or method called main. That's the name of the function. These 3 keywords in front of it tells you about something about this function or this method called main. The first one you see here is called public. This is the access. I put here. This is the access modifier. Sometimes access specifier. You had the term. It's same thing. It's this keyword public here. And then this static, it's another special modifier. We talked about static a little bit last time. This static here will cause or force this function, this method, to be static or non-static. Okay, I mean, if it's static, that means it can be accessed without creating the object. We'll go over that again a couple of times until you get it. Okay, so this one here is the data type, the void. And then we have here the function or identifier. Okay, the actual function name, which is an identifier. Because when you create a variable name, exactly the same as a variable name. If you look at this, without the parentheses, you see it is just another variable, right? And then followed by a pair of parentheses, and the inside here is optional. You can have parameters or you don't. Okay, in this example, this one, it needs it because you have to, because it's forcing to. It's part of the parent class function, so you cannot omit that. It's required in this example here. Then followed by a pair of curly braces, just like the class up here. So your program starts, your block of code starts from here to the end of that block. You must always have a matching block of curly braces. You cannot have just like one like that. If you do, it's going to have an error, and you have a syntax error. Okay, so always close it, and your IDE will always do that for you automatically. If you don't have this type of IDE, you just have to manually close it every time. Okay, yep.
So the style question, whether we keep the bracket over there and line up over here or line them up by column.
Yeah, it's just a matter of preference.
Is it?
Yeah.
What's the
Like
most prevalent preference?
there's like 7 or 8 different kinds.
Right.
Yeah, I usually put that there.
Yeah.
Just because you might accidentally put something here. If you do that, it's a syntax error.
Yeah.
So if you put it right here, you know for sure that everything comes after this will be inside that block of code. Yeah.
I like it. When that's the original C programming book?
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, very, very popular. One is like that. The other, they prefer to put on the next line, so they all matched up. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So right. So I prefer this one, and then it's also much quicker to type. But just in case you forget. Yeah. Yeah.
So they're not really
Right. Okay, so that is how you construct your method. Okay. Now, if you want to create another method, then you would do the same thing. Now, when you create your functions, it doesn't matter in which order you put. Okay, because it's as long as it's in the global space, I can put it above the main method or below that. It doesn't matter. Okay, the order is not important here anymore, but your variables, they do. Okay, in most cases, they do, but in terms of functions, it doesn't matter where you put them. Okay, in some languages, in procedural languages, you have to put it up above it. If you remember way back, like Pascal, for example, you have to put your function above the one below so that the anything underneath it can call it. And C++, you also have something similar. You have to actually declare all your functions in the function head before you can actually use them in the body of the code. So that's, again, the C++. But Java, it doesn't matter where you put them as long as they're in the class space. Okay, so that's a function. You can create another function here. So we create another function. We'll also have a public type of function. Again, the word static here is optional. Okay, there's a list in the book that tells you like the difference between a static and non-static data. There's some restrictions in terms of what type of function you're using, whether if it's a static or non-static function. Okay, and I did that a little bit last week, but let's just say we have a function here. We'll use the static modify as well. No, not inside this function. Okay, this is the end of the class, right? Okay, so it has to be outside of this function. And then we'll give it a data type. So the data type will be your usual data type. You have those 8 primitive types we talked about last week, right? The int, double, float, string, boolean, all those types will be here. One type that we don't use and that is void. Void is not really a data type. You can call it data type. It's really not. It just means it does not return a value. So the void will be synonymous to the sub procedure in Visual Basic, where you don't return any data back. Anything else besides void, you have to return something back, okay, like an integer or a boolean or a string of some sort. So we'll talk about the data return type in a bit here. And then the name of a function. We'll call this print. And then the pair of paren, let's say we take no parameter, and then we'll just close that with the curly braces. So there's our second function called print. And so inside here, then you will provide a list of statements to do what this function is supposed to do, right? So typically when you write a function or a method, remember that a function is supposed to do one thing and one thing only, right? It's supposed to be very specific. If it's a print, then that's all it should do. It's supposed to print something to the screen, okay? You don't want to do any calculation. Sometimes you have to, but usually you don't want to do like any other things other than print. So in a sense, you kind of make this function very abstract because you don't really know sometimes, right? If you don't have access to the actual function, you don't know what's going on inside the function. All you know is just I send them some data, it prints it for me. Okay, what happens in there is a black box. Okay. But as a programmer yourself, you write it, yeah, you know what's going on. So typically, functions are very specific to do certain things only, to do one task. That's why you have like a function of a car. You drive, you just drive. You turn, you make a turn. You step on the brake. It does one thing and one thing only. Same thing in programming languages. Okay. So some functions return data, some don't. Right. So the ones that don't return data always have void. We can do another function down here that returns something. We could do another public, static, and we'll have this return the data type of a string. Okay, return a string, and we'll basically just combine 2 strings together into one and return the long string back. Right? So you can say join 2 strings. And notice how I name my function. I'll make it as meaningful as I can so that I know that this function does exactly what it's supposed to do. It joins 2 functions, right? I probably should say joins, but it's understood. Okay, so, and notice that it has a red line here. If I mouse over that, it says this method must return a result of type string. Okay, so that means inside the body here somewhere, I must have a return statement. It must return something back. Whatever that is, it has to be of type string. Okay? So, for example, we could just put, for now, just to make this code happy, I could put the string of hi. Okay? So now it's happy because the return type matches the return data type here, and so that's what it's supposed to do. So the difference between these two, this is type void. It does not return data. It just does its job and then it's done. This one here, it does something and it returns something back. Okay. So the void type is like I give you a command. I would say something like, Anthony, here's a key to the car, go home, right? He would just drive you go home. I'm not expecting him to come back. Okay, but if I say, hey, Anthony has $10, can you go to the soda machine and buy me a soda? I expect him to come back with the soda. Okay, so that is the data return type. That's the difference between those two. Okay, All right, so let's just say that the string type, I'm also going to pass him some data. Like if I said, Anthony, go buy me a soda, or I have to give you some money, right? So how do I give that to Anthony? Well, I put that inside the paren here. So I'm going to say it accepts another, as I say, it takes two strings. That's what the function says. So I have to supply the placeholder for those strings. So it takes parameters. These are called parameters. One is of string A. I can also have another one called string B. Okay, so this is a data. It's a local variable to this function called join two strings. And these two variables are all both type string. Okay. And when you join the two strings together, then basically all you have to do is replace the high here with A plus B. I'm joining two strings together. Okay, notice that the plus sign means that it's like a mathematical operation. Yes, it is. But in terms of, in Java, if it's a string, then it knows that you actually concatenate the strings together. You're combining, you're joining two strings together. If they're numbers, then they know that that's addition. Okay, it knows that implicitly behind the engine here, so we don't have to worry about checking whether that's a string or not. Okay, so I will get that joint string, and then it will return that joint string back together as a single string, and I can print that out. So, for example, let's go back up here to the main function, and when I fix this back, it looks kind of ugly here. So in our main function, okay, I'm going to pass in two strings to this function called join two strings, and print it out. Right? So let's create a string variable. We call it string str. Let's call it A also. And this one will just say hello. And then we'll create another one called string B is earth.
Thank goodness it's not hello world.
We'll pass that. We'll pass that now. Earth now. I can say moon. All right. So you want to
Midnight moon would be better.
move? Yeah. Next one. Okay, so I'm going to pass this to the string, join two strings, and it will return the new string back. Okay, so I will create another string, C, and this string C will call this function called join two strings. And I'll tell you why it has to be on the right side. Anybody know why it has to be on the right side? Yeah, so, okay, well, let's finish this first. I'll go back. So we're going to pass string A, because it needs a string A. So I pass string A to it. It takes two parameters, so comma, the second string is B. Okay, you have to match the exact type of string or data type and the exact number of variables in there. If there are two of them, you have to supply two of them. If there are 10, you have to supply all 10. Okay? Otherwise, you can't use it. And sometimes the order is not important. In this case, maybe, right? Because the word will be in a different order, so it's important. If you just do calculation, like the number 1 and 2, maybe it's not important. But usually the order is important. So I do that, and then I'm going to pass the string C to the print function down here. So I'm going to create another variable here so that I can call something like print C. Okay? Print the string C, the new string, out to the console. So now, since we're going to pass C to it and the print doesn't have that parameter, I have to modify this print function to accept the type string. And again, here you can call it C, or you just call it str, maybe something like that. Again, just a placeholder. It doesn't matter what name you give. And then down here, we can go and type out the SOUT control space bar to have the system out.print, print line, and we're going to print str to the screen. Okay, so these two here are called method calls. I'm calling a method here. I'm calling this function called join two strings. This is also a method call. I'm calling the method print. Or we call this, you're invoking a function. Okay? So functions are kind of just sit there. They don't do anything until you call it. Okay? You have to call them to use them. Okay? So it's called a function call. So here, this function is on the right side of the equal sign. This one is not. Okay? In some languages, it's required that any function that returns a data type must be on the equal sign, on the right side of the equal sign, because it's returning something back. So in this case, return a data. So that data must be assigned to another placeholder, just like the word hello here, right? It cannot exist itself in that space. It needs to be assigned to another placeholder, like A. So the same thing here. This function returns a string. So when the string comes back, even though this is just the name of a function, the actual data comes back as a string, and then it needs to be assigned to another variable. In this case, it would be C. Okay? That's why it has to be on the right side of the equal sign. But in Java, you don't have to do that either. I could just put that in itself, and it would still be fine, although that data coming back would just lost. Okay? In other words, I could just do I could just still do this if and it would still run. I just do that, it would still run. So you can see there's no error, except what the data comes back, it has no place to go, and it's just gone from memory. But you can do that sometimes. I mean, it's kind of meaningless to do it, but you can do that. It doesn't crash in Java.
So Java will remove all references to that return?
Yeah, it will remove it. If you have any print statements in there, it will print it out. We'll do any calculations, and it will return back. It will return null. So actually, as if it's a type of void. Okay. So, but if it's a function return something, usually you want that data to come back and use that data. Question?
I think we've already seen that with the scanners next line function, where you don't have to save the next line to anything.
Yes. You just read off that thing and it's gone, right? Good point. All right, so if you save this file and if you run it, you should have the word Hello Earth all jumbled together in one long string called Hello Earth there. Okay, so I already showed you kind of like what you can do with the print statement. Instead of writing this out every time, you could rewrite your own print statement so that you just pass data to the print and it will print it out for you. So you don't have to do it many times. Okay.
So that's like instead of like multiple print line statements, you call it one.
Yeah, it's shorter, right? Instead of print, you can just put O, and then O, right? Yeah, so it's very short now, right? So, and that is the beauty of functions. Functions is made to make it so that you can reuse that function again and again. The piece of code again and again is to make your code to be more modularized. Okay, you build so that you have different modules, and you can reuse those code again and again. And that's the beauty of functions. Okay, so we have two functions, and they both take parameters. One returns a string, one returns nothing, void. So if it's a void, you cannot go in here and force a return type. If you do that, it's going to give you an error, and because it does not know what to return. Okay, so you cannot return anything in here. Just leave it blank like that. Okay, so one of the rules about static function, like the main function here, is that since it's a static function, inside here, if I need to call other functions, like the print and the join two strings, both of these functions must also be the same, have must also be static. Otherwise, you cannot call it. Okay, so a static function cannot call non-static function. That is the main rule. Okay, static only calls static. If I take the static out, you'll see that the print method call is no longer valid. And this has to do with objects. Okay, so
Can you say that again?
the static,
Yes. So the.
yeah,
It would be a static to call a static.
yes, a static function. If you create a static function, inside that function, if you make other function calls, okay, those functions that you are calling must also be static. Okay, you cannot call a non-static function within a static function. It's confusing a little bit, but yeah, it's like that. But the other way around is not true. If the print is a non-static function, then it can call both types. It doesn't matter what type it is. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So now this is how you create functions or methods in your program, your class. One thing I didn't talk about is like the non-static type. And we'll do that by creating another class, and we'll use that class to create some non-static data. So why don't we go ahead and create another class in here. We'll create the car class we talked about earlier, so that we'll use that to instantiate a car object. Okay, so let's go in your program in the same package here. Just right click and create a new class. Okay, or just click the green icon up here, either way. And we'll call this class just car class. This is it's just a class by itself, so it's not going to be the main program. So therefore, please don't put the void static main in here. Okay, so just going to be an empty class, just like that, because it's not the main entry program. We're going to use this class to create cars. So it's like a template. Okay, so in Java, you have to have one public class like car for this file. And if you remember from chapter 1, so when you create a Java file, the class name must also match the file name. That is the rule for Java. In C# it's not the case, but Java it is. You cannot change the name here to something else and have a different name, or you have a compilation error. Okay, the same name. You can have other classes in the same file, however. I could, for example, have another class in here called maybe, I don't know, just for example, X. Okay? So you can have more than two classes, one class in the same file. It's just that you cannot put the other class with the keyword public, because only one can have a public access. And that public class, so either it's this one or that one, right? You can't have both. But if you do that, then the name of this has to be the name of the file. Okay? So that is the trick here. So usually you don't put a lot of classes in the same file. You separate those out so that they're easy to manage. But sometimes you can put in the same file if that class is pretty small and it's only used for that class only. Okay? You can also have a class that is nested in some other class as well. It's very specific to that car class. Maybe you have a class that is only applied to the car class. And then, so if it's nested inside the car class, you can set it so it's private to the car class. Okay, so we sort of point that out, that you might see in other code why you can or why you cannot, right? So you can. So, okay, so this car class, we're going to create those properties, those attributes. We call the VIN number, the year, the make, model, right? So these are called the data members. I'm going to list you all these couple names here. They all mean the same thing. We see the word data members, data fields, instance, variables. Okay, the word instance is important. These are all kind of mean the same thing. And sometimes you have the word attributes. So all these, when you hear these terms, you know that these are variables or identifiers that describe this car or this object type. And these are just variables. So one will be like the string type of the VIN number, right? So this is a VIN number. Has a string type. Okay, notice that I did not put the word public or private in front. If you don't do that, then it will be set to what's called a package access type. It's still going to be public, but only can access within the package called class objects. If you go outside of this package, because I can have another package called maybe classes dot something else, I can still reach into this classical car and try to get the VIN number. Okay, so if you're outside of this package, you can't access it. Okay, so you have a restriction. So usually you put something like private or public there. Okay, it's usually always private. Okay, probably 99% of the time it's going to be private. We talked. I'm not sure we talked about this before or not, but so that you can have control of your data. And again, we'll revisit this again next chapter. So one field for the VIN number. I have another private, maybe the string type for the make. And the reason I put it in uppercase is because I don't know if you really use uppercase or lowercase. And usually if you make VIN number, then that VIN number is usually, it's an acronym, so that's why I call it uppercase. Otherwise, your variable names, you usually all be lowercase. I follow the camel case. And I have another private variable string type as well for model. And then one more private of type integer for the year. So we have 4 data fields. These are all instance variables, and they're not static. Okay, if you want to make it static, you put static in here, like static, like that. But they're not static, and there's a reason why. Okay. So these are fields. Once you set to private, that means that if you want to access this data, you cannot access them directly. You will have to access these through another function inside this class called car, a public function. So in order to change this VIN number, I would have to go in here and create a function, and I'll make this function public. Okay. If I want to set the VIN number, in this case, I'm not setting it, right? So if I want to set it, I'm going to go and public void. So I'm going to say set VIN number, VIN. I have a function to call set VIN. So when I set the VIN number, I have to pass the data to it so that it can set the VIN number. So I'll put here a data type that will match exactly the same as this type here. Okay, so it'll be like string, and I'll use lowercase for VIN. So when I call this function set VIN, I'm going to pass a string of numbers to this, and once I receive the number, then I'm going to set this VIN up here equal to this VIN here. So now the VIN number has been set. Yeah.
Aren't you supposed to define functions outside the class?
No.
No.
Inside the class?
Yes.
Yeah, it have to be inside the class.
Thanks.
But outside of another function. Okay. So if you save this file, and we're going to go back to the main program we had earlier. I'm gonna have to remove these. You can just select them all like that with the mouse, and press the Control question mark to comment these out. Okay, it's commenting. It's like so that it doesn't execute in the code. It will leave the main function as is. and I'll put above here. And we're creating a car object out of this car class. So to create an object, this is called object instantiation. Basically just create an object. Okay, when you create an object, you need a class to create it. So it's called, the type will be car, right? And the car here will be, I just like to call Mustang. Okay, so create an object called Mustang, and then this is a new car, so new car. And we'll call the function called car here. So this is how you create an object out of a class. The name of the class followed by an identifier, what the object is, equals the word new followed by the same data type here, the function, the class name, and a parentheses. So it's a special function called a constructor that constructs or builds or creates that object called Mustang. Okay. So from this point on, if I want to change the data over here, if I want to change the data, these data here, because once I create this object called car, all these data will be active in the car object, but they're all empty because I didn't assign any data to it. Okay, so there'll be just no blank and then 0 for the year. So now this Mustang is an object. Once that has been created, it has access to all these data here, and I can set those data by using the dot notation. Okay, the Mustang dot, and it will tell you which field, which data you can access and which one you cannot access. And you will see that these are some functions that is part of the object, but the ones that you only see are actually they're called set VIN number, right? Set VIN, and has a type string. That's the only one you can access because that function is made public. Okay, you cannot access the other data directly. So now if you want to change its VIN number to something else, you have to pass in the VIN number here. It's a string, so I can put like 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C. That's assuming that is the VIN number for this car. So I'm setting the VIN number through a function called setVin, and that function is set to public. If you change the function to private, then you no longer have access to that either, so you cannot change any of this data. Okay? Yeah, this is what's called the encapsulation part of that object-oriented principle, because you're hiding those data from other class. So in this case, it's hiding from the main program class. So it cannot access the data only through an object, and the object can only access it if the function or the data has been set to public. So this is the only data that you can access from here. You cannot access the make, model, and year at all because they're all set to private, and there's no other way to get those data. Okay, it will be a part of the car object here, the Mustang, but you cannot access it. So in order to use them, you have to set either all of these to public, or you access those through a function here again called public function to get that. So notice this is a void type, right? Now we learned that void, you don't get the data back. I only set the VIN number. Now how do I get the VIN number back? You can't. And so that's why you have another function to get the VIN number back. So you have another one called public. I'm returning the data of string type back, and this is going to be called getVin. We call it get, so it makes sense. I'm getting it back. I'm just setting that some data. So when I get the data, I'm not passing any data to it. I just get it back. So therefore, I'm not passing any data to it. And then here, it's a function that returns a string. So what am I returning? I'm returning the VIN number back to whoever is requesting that. Okay? So you'll usually have a pair of functions for each of these parameters here, of these fields. So that because they're all private, the only way to set those data are through these two public functions right here, called the set and the get. And these are called setters and getters. Okay? So every field usually have a setter and getter function to go with it, so that you can access those data indirectly. And you do that so that the other classes don't have access to your data directly, so they cannot change your data. And also you can have ways to validate those data, okay, through your function. Another name you hear is called accessors and mutators. It also mean the same thing. So when I say setters and getters, or getters and setters, accessors and mutators, that's what they mean. So this is a get. So it's a accessors, right? You access the data only. This is a set. You're changing the data, so you're actually mutating the state of those data. So this is called mutators. Okay. So usually when you create a class, I ask you to create some variables, some fields. Right away after that, create the setter and getter for those. And you'll see that this is how you do it, and it can be very tedious if you have a lot of them. So Eclipse has a shortcut to help you. Okay, if you type your data all here, and if you put your mouse anywhere below that or around here, just do a right click, and then go to the source, and it will tell you this is a function called generate getters and setters. Okay, so if you click on that one, it will list all the data fields that has not been set and get. So we already set the VIN number. That's why it's not visible here. So I can just go and select all of them and just click OK. And here it creates all that for you, so you don't have to do it. Okay? Yeah, most IDEs have it. NetBeans also has it too. Yeah, only way to get to the private data here, data fields, is to use a function that is called of type public. And inside that function you can return that, because this is a global variable. Okay? And you can also set the data because it's a global in a global space. Okay. So only set within the function itself. Because this function, the set and the get, belongs to the class called car, these are its own data. So you can set it. So I cannot go directly outside of here and try to change the data by going to like Mustang.VIN equals 123. Okay, it doesn't allow me to do that. So the only thing to do is through a function called set or the get.